Hello everyone. So today we come towards the close of the first module, and we talk about, let me go through the details of the first module. The first module started by talking about value theory. What is it to value? So we looked at it as, just 1 minute, we looked at it as a human world event and a natural world event. Right, this is just to a quick recap of what we did. So when we talk about value theory, what is it to value? We ascribe values to things, objects, people, and make preferences. So this is at an introductory level for you to make sense of how would you use terms of moral philosophy of ethics as conceptual tools to describe the situation, to engage with others, and to work out solutions. So to make sense of that, well, to that elementary allegation that, well, moral judgments are just opinions. Well, they may be opinions, but they matter because, like law, like language, they are human world events. So law, language, now rarely can any of us say that, well, language does not matter or language is to each his own, because the whole point of communication is to have a shared language, and in that sense we can understand what is the moral universe or the moral domain. So this is a part of the human world. Then we talked about valuation takes place in different disciplines. So we have we went through a host of disciplines where valuation takes place. So valuation is something very fundamental to human perception or human cognition or making sense of the world. In fact, we went ahead there to see how valuation almost defines the character of an institution, organization, or an individual, that what kind of value preferences take. And in that sense, values were foundational in the sense that they were the frame of reference from which we look at the universe. So a country is founded on certain values, an institution, an individual holds certain values as sacred. So the foundational values actually define what is fundamental and how do we understand or give character to an institution or to a person or an individual. Now we have a smaller part left, is the intrinsic and extrinsic values, and then followed by universal and situational values, and finally it is moral and religious values. So here the attention that you need to pay or that is going to be paid is on intrinsic and extrinsic values. So for this, a text or a helpful text that I would recommend is for you to go through the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that is freely available on the internet, and look for the intrinsic versus extrinsic value entry in that encyclopedia. This is the link. You may not be able to copy it from the image, but if it can be posted in the description, that would be great. But in any way, if you just search out for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and in that SEP as it is generally abbreviated, and you can look at it and look at this particular entry. So now coming to intrinsic. Intrinsic is a term, intrinsic and extrinsic, that you use in a lot of vocabulary, lot of terms, lot of fields, disciplines, knowledge. We look at intrinsic and extrinsic. So in the domain of values, intrinsic values are some things which are valuable in itself or valuable for its own sake. So things that we do which are valuable for its own sake. And extrinsics is something which is not instrumental, which is not intrinsic, sorry, which is rather instrumental. Instrumental meaning that it is used to achieve something, it is used as a means to achieve something, it is valuable for what it begets. So let's think of a few examples, and to my undergraduate students, I always start with the example of the 5 days in a week. They are an example of extrinsic valuation generally, because you tolerate those 5 days of a week for the weekend that comes along. So the weekend turns out to be of intrinsic value. So the weekdays and the work and the classes in the weekdays are a part of the are extrinsically valuable, because crossing them or going through them, it gets you to the weekend, which is intrinsically valuable, because which is valuable in itself. So you love holidays because things are they are intrinsically valuable, right? So this is simplifying in a jocular sense for you to make sense of what is intrinsic valuation versus extrinsic valuation. This is one example. Let me say look at the example of, say, political or governments or political domains. When we look at governments building infrastructure, now dams, roads, bridges, they are being built. So are they of any intrinsic value? Well, in one line of argument, they are not of intrinsic value, but they are of extrinsic value, because what they bring about. And what do they bring about? They bring about a sense of comfort, flourishment and development to the people at large. So roads, dams, bridges are useful not intrinsically but extrinsically, because they help people lead better lives. So roads, they can travel, dams, they can have water around the year, bridges, they can cross, they can reduce travel time. So it's quite simple, but it just needs an articulation for you to understand this. Another example of which is probably the easiest example to connect to is money as extrinsically valuable, right? But it can also be intrinsically valuable. It can be intrinsically valuable for whom? Well, it can be intrinsically valuable for the miser, because the miser takes joy in accumulating money, looking at the hoards of money that has been accumulated, and that itself is a source of joy. But for most of us, money is a source of, money is important. Money is important not because it is not because it is something valuable in itself, but for what it can get. Money can get you freedom, money can get you conveniences, money can get you time, money can get you assistance. So money is valuable because it gets you many things. So in that sense, money is extrinsically valuable. It is instrumental. It is instrumental to attain things that we value. And what are the things that instrumental values or extrinsic values are generally directed towards instrumental values. Are generally directed towards intrinsic values. So let me put that out, write that down here. So when we see extrinsic values are directed towards intrinsic values, that means so money as an extrinsic value is directed towards the intrinsic value of comfort, good life, flourishing. So it is that which gets along. So let me think of another example that comes to elaborate this distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic value. Let's say, and here there are generalizations being made, and there will surely be exceptions, but to look at it, to get the to understand the drift of the difference, we are undertaking a generalization. So let's say working in the gym or lifting weights, now that's something many of us do, is something which is probably extrinsically valuable because it brings about better health or a better shape of one's body. Compare this with playing games. Now playing games is most or often intrinsically valuable because you enjoy the process, whereas lifting weights is not something that one may enjoy. At least for most of us, one may not enjoy, but one does it for the benefits that it yields, whereas playing games is something that one enjoys the process, and the health or the other goals are side effects that come along. So if we look at extrinsic values and intrinsic values, exercise versus or gymnasium versus or a gym versus a sport also brings about that difference. Now, I would invite you to go ahead and think of the many differences that you can identify between intrinsic values and extrinsic values. Now, there may be people who enjoy lifting weights, and then for them this particular activity becomes intrinsically valuable. There may be many people who just play a game to become fit, and for them that becomes extrinsically valuable. But the whole point of sports or games is an active involvement, and it is unlikely that one can be involved in a game or without putting oneself mentally into it. So, of course, there are exceptions, and one can argue from the exceptions, but the point of understanding this is to understand that what are the differences between between intrinsic values and extrinsic values. Now, goals and consequences are generally intrinsically valuable. Intrinsic values are often considered as the core of moral thinking. It is foundational and it answers the recursive whys. What is meant by here? We are talking about this particular entry here, that goals and consequences, that means the goals towards which extrinsic values are directed, towards activities for which extrinsic values are directed, are generally intrinsically valuable, right. So, intrinsic values have been given a lot of importance in moral philosophy, and many moral philosophers regard them as the core or the foundation of ethical thinking. Now, if we go ahead and look at the recursive why question, say when one looks at why one does something. So, let us think of a classical question of why does a painter paint, or why does a singer sing, or why does a sculptor sculpt. Now, these are all activities which generally tend to an intrinsically valuable answer. So, a painter paints or a singer sings because it gives joy to that particular person. Now, look at it this way: a singer can sing as a performance or as an expression of oneself. So, when one is singing as a performance, one would look at the response that one gets from their audience as a crucial part for to assess the value in that particular activity. So, but whereas when a singer sings for expression, and perhaps many of us would better understand it or relate to it as bathroom singers. Now, singers who sing to themselves or sing for themselves, they are singing as in the mode of a expression. So, when we look as an artist creating something for as an expression vis-a-vis something as a performance, we can see the difference. An expression is generally intrinsic value, a performance is generally an extrinsic value. So, depending on how much recognition one gets from the audience, one could relate the joy or the success of that particular act of art, it may be singing or whichever form of art that one goes for. So, why have moral philosophers held intrinsic values as foundational? They have held intrinsic values as foundational because it answers the recursive whys, answering the recursive whys. Now, what is the recursive why? So, when we ask a question that, well, why are you studying? You are studying to get a degree. Why do you want a degree? You want to get a degree so that you get a better job. Why do you want a better job? You want a better job so that you have a comfortable life. So, why do you want a comfortable life? No, because the comfortable life is an end in itself, because that is what gives me peace and happiness. So, here when we are ultimately going down a value question domino, asking one question after the other, generally the foundational question or the bedrock position, the foundational answer or the bedrock answer has been an intrinsic value that we've been claiming. Now, where does this lead us to? If we look at what is the good life, right? This classical question is actually a question of identifying the intrinsic values, right? It can be pleasure, excellence, peace. The answer to this question lays out a worldview of individuals, societies, constitutions and civilizations. So, when we look at this question that what is the good life, very often we answer that question, right? So, parliaments have to decide, and what is the good life is not a question that is a classic theory question, but it is a question that we all answer to ourselves. Our countries answer to themselves in their constitutions, our religion answers, our society's answers, our family answers. So, we all thinkingly, unthinkingly, deliberately or intuitively have a picture of the good life. Now, the picture of the good life, what is that picture of the good life, or what is the worldview that we have? That is actually the final intrinsic values on which it is the facade of, or not the facade, the structure of our moral universe is founded upon. So, for the hedonist, right, the hedonist would look at pleasure as the final value, as the instrumental value. So, we are looking at whatever we do so that we should be able to get the maximum pleasure we can. Excellence, this is typically what Aristotle would hold, eudaimonia as something, excellence as the final value of life or the intrinsic value of life. So, everything has to be directed to towards excellence, and that is the intrinsic value of life. Peace, maybe you can have the Upanishadic philosophy looking for peace or salvation. So, or a way of looking which looks that peace should be the final thing that one should be attaining, right. So, how we answer this question, what is the good life, is actually we are answering the question that what are the core intrinsic values that we are holding, both as a society, as a individual, as a country. So, let us say as a constitution describes fraternity as a core intrinsic value, that means the society is probably more communitarian and greatly values the fraternity amongst people, whereas a constitution can completely celebrate individualism and thereby does not hold fraternity as an intrinsically valuable goal, and just holds individual liberty as an intrinsically valuable goal. As an individual, one would look at some things, or the pole, I would say you can regard the intrinsic values as the pole star of your life, because the pole star is where towards which all your actions orient and direct towards. So, when we talk about identifying the intrinsic value, when we identify the intrinsic value, we are actually identifying the fundamental question of what is the good life that we can go ahead for. The same value can be intrinsic for one and extrinsic for another. For example, knowledge is intrinsically valuable to the curious and extrinsically valuable to the one who wants to bring about change in the world of lived experience. So, here we look at the example that we have just talked about in the example of the gym and the sports example, that for some people what is intrinsic may be extrinsically valuable and vice versa for some. So, being intrinsically valuable or extrinsically valuable is not, IV or EV is not a property of the act, but it is the ascription of the agent, meaning the person, the actor. So, when we look at knowledge per se, now many of us as students we have been curious, and many classes and probably philosophy classes are something that one takes out of curiosity, for the desire to know. In fact, that has been a fundamental Socratic motivation to do philosophy, in fact even for governance, that well, governance is something which is or philosophy is something which is to be done for its own sake. So governance is also given as an example, to be done for its own sake, not for what it yields. Maybe it yields honor, maybe it yields respect, maybe it yields a sense of power, maybe it yields a downright wealth. So that is not the motivation. So the for Aristotle, he came about describing, well, the ideal ruler is one who is not interested in the consequences of, or the fruits of governance that comes to the governor. So when we look at something that is intrinsically valuable, it can be extrinsically valuable for somebody else. So to the curious student, knowledge is intrinsically valuable. To the one who is looking for a career or an opportunity and wanting to choose the best means to arrive at it, clearly that stream of knowledge is an extrinsically valuable stream. And you can see this, I mean, we are in a world where we have to make a lot of instrumental or extrinsic choices, because we have the instrumental or we have the intrinsic goal connected. I have made this error, but corrected, of confusing the intrinsic with the instrumental. So perhaps I will stick only to intrinsic and extrinsic values, and extrinsic values are to be understood same as instrumental values. So let me just write it down in case there is a confusion for anybody. So when there is intrinsic and there is extrinsic, and extrinsic is the same thing as instrumental. So now and as we understand that these values are not properties of the acts, but they are ascriptions of the agent. So as ascriptions of the agent, for somebody a particular act can be extrinsically valuable, for somebody an act can be intrinsically valuable. Now this idea of goodness, okay, when we talk about technology as the application of science, and the classical example here I mentioned because I frequently come across. Now science and technology, although used simultaneously, are two distinct fields. Science is something which is looking or trying to understand the world. Technology is trying to apply science to make to affect the world out there. So for science, maybe knowledge is intrinsically valuable, a very broad generalization. Technology goes ahead and tries to make apply science to change the world out there. So when you have a strong sense of entrepreneurship, you want to apply a particular concept to affect the world there, you can both be intrinsic and extrinsically motivated. But when you want to make a change out there, then you are more likely looking at the source of information as something which is extrinsically valuable. In the same breath, let me also add that one can also have both degrees of intrinsic and extrinsic value attached to the same act. For the purpose, as this is an introductory course, and for the purpose of clarity, we are looking at or we are making a forced binary in concept, so that the clarity emerges between these two, between two concepts always. But as in practice, as in lived experience, as in reality, as in the world out there, concepts are not watertight. They are having a thick buffer zone between them. So just as a particular act can be both extrinsically motivated and intrinsically motivated to certain degrees, maybe sometimes more extrinsic, less intrinsic, sometimes less intrinsic, more extrinsic. So it can change along. So just like a student can both be learning for the sake of curiosity and also making one's career. It is not an exclusive sense that, well, if it is intrinsic, it is not extrinsic. Now I would like to leave you with a little more on intrinsic and extrinsic values when we talk about what is intrinsic value. And a lot of philosophers, G.E. Moore, Peter Geach, Christian Korsgaard, have all talked about trying to do a meta-ethical analysis of this concept of good. So we will not go into that, but I just want to leave you with on the surface of that. So, when we mean what is this notion of good, how do we at all define this concept of good? We, well, G.E. Moore as a philosopher in a classical paper tried to establish that the intrinsic goodness as something irreducible and probably indescribable, that something which is good in itself. When you look at good, so the use of the term good, you can use a good knife, a good student, a good person, and yet if one asks you to describe what is good, you will find difficulty in describing it, or you will find different people answering it differently. For maybe somebody who's who finds a person good, because a good knife or a good tool is something that does its job well. A good person in certain Greek schools would be somebody who does the job of being a human being well. And what is the job of a human being? Is to be a humane person. Maybe somebody who values being helpful would hold that a good person has to be helpful, but somebody whose intrinsic value core sees excellence would hold that as a good person. So, good is a problematic notion, it is not that simple, and I want to leave you with a small example of Peter Geach when he talks about the difficulty of good as a predicate. So, when we say X is a yellow bird, we can always break it down into X is yellow and X is a bird, but can we do the same thing when we say X is a good singer? So, X is good and X is a singer, that won't make sense, because here good is and is predicating singer and is saying that, well, is good at the job of singing, but not good in general. Now, let us come to two other forms of ethics that we or universal and situational ethics. Now, as the name implies, universal ethics are claims that are independent of the local frame of reference, right. So, when it is independent of local frame of reference, it is it can be global in its application, whereas situational ethics is has been described as something that emerges from that particular property of the situation, right. So, when somebody says when a philosopher talks about my station and its duties, that means by virtue of being in a particular position, these are the duties that I have. Now, moral and religious ethics is again in the same line, slightly similar. So, when one regards oneself as spiritual but not religious, one is probably advocating certain claims that one has certain moral values, but which are not founded by religion, right. There is no necessary contradiction between morality and religion, but religious values can very often be based on religious books, religious traditions, and they need to have a justification that is rooted in religion and religious literature, whereas moral values tend to be can also be religious, can also be sourced from religion, but can also be standing on their own independent of religion. So, that is a small difference that you should be aware of. So, with this we come to the end of the first module, and we will begin the next module in the next class. Thank you.